I won millions overnight, but instead of celebrating, I stayed silent. I wanted to see who truly cared. Pretending to be broke, I asked my family for help. One by one, they turned their backs. That's when I knew my revenge would be unforgettable. The moment I held the winning lottery ticket in my hand, my entire world shifted. A storm of disbelief, joy, and nervous energy surged through me, and for a second I thought I was dreaming. The numbers matched perfectly. Every digit aligned. Millions were mine, just like that. In an instant, the struggles I had endured, the financial pressures I carried, and the quiet envy of watching others live freely were gone. I was a millionaire, and no one could take that away. Yet instead of calling my family to share the news, instead of bursting into tears of joy in their arms, I made a decision that would forever change everything. I decided not to tell a soul. I knew my family too well. Over the years, I had seen their true nature creep out in subtle ways, how cousins gossiped when someone was struggling, how uncles argued about inheritances before a loved one had even passed, how some relatives pretended to care but only when it suited them. I remembered the bitter jokes at my expense when I had lost a job once. I remembered the way my siblings had laughed about me being unlucky in life. They didn't know that their small stings had settled deep in my memory. Winning millions didn't erase those scars. It sharpened them. I looked at the check and told myself that this was my chance to see everything clearly. Money didn't just change people, it revealed them. If I told them immediately, I would never know who truly cared about me and who only cared about what I could give. I wanted the truth, raw and unfiltered. So, I decided to craft a story that would pull back the mask from every single one of them. I told myself I would pretend to be broke, penniless, barely scraping by. I would ask for help in small, harmless ways. And whoever reached out their hand when they thought I had nothing, that would be the person I would treasure forever. I began building the lie carefully. I sold my car and told everyone it was because I couldn't afford the repairs. I moved into a smaller apartment and hinted that rent was eating away at me. At family gatherings, I let sighs escape, quiet enough for someone to ask what was wrong but loud enough for curiosity to linger. And when the first question came, "Are you doing okay?" I gave them the story I had prepared. I told them I had lost money in a bad investment. I told them debts were piling up, that bills were suffocating me. I told them I was drowning. Some shook their heads with shallow sympathy, muttering that life was cruel. Others offered cheap advice: work harder, cut back on luxuries, while their eyes sparkled with quiet amusement, as though my downfall was entertainment. Not one of them leaned in to say, "Don't worry, I've got you." Not one. I remember sitting across from one of my cousins, someone I had shared childhood summers with, someone I had trusted with secrets. I told him that I was 2 months behind on rent and worried about losing my place. He looked at me, smirked, and shrugged. "That's tough. Maybe it's time you swallowed your pride and moved back with your parents." There was no offer of even a small loan, no suggestion of temporary help. His eyes carried something darker, relief, maybe even joy, at seeing me falter. I tested another relative, an aunt who always bragged about being family-oriented, who paraded herself as generous and loving. I asked if she could spare a little money, just enough to cover groceries for a week. Her smile faltered. She said she'd pray for me, then immediately began talking about how expensive her new kitchen renovation was. The message was clear: her countertops mattered more than my survival. It wasn't just rejection, it was the tone, the smugness, the underlying delight in seeing me struggle. Whispers began circulating. I could feel them. At one family dinner, I caught the way 2 of my uncles leaned toward each other, muttering under their breath. I only caught fragments: bad choices, finally catching up, shouldn't have been so reckless. They laughed. My downfall was their gossip. Each rejection burned, not because I needed their help, I didn't. I had millions resting safely, untouched. It burned because I finally saw the truth I had suspected all along. Without the mask of my hidden wealth, I was nothing to them. My worth in their eyes had always been tied to what I could offer, never who I was. But in the middle of this parade of selfishness, one moment stood apart. I reached out to a distant relative, someone who rarely spoke up in family matters, someone who had always been quiet, almost invisible in gatherings. I told her I was struggling to pay electricity bills. She didn't hesitate. She didn't judge. She simply said, "I'll help." She didn't ask how I'd gotten into trouble, didn't question whether I'd ever pay her back. She sent me what she could, even though she herself didn't have much. It wasn't the amount that mattered, it was the heart behind it. And in that instant, I knew she was different from the rest. Still, I continued the test. I wanted to see how deep the betrayal would go, how shameless the gossip would become. I spoke to another cousin, explaining I might have to sell my few remaining valuables. Instead of offering help, he asked slyly if I'd give him first dibs on my belongings at a cheap price. He grinned, as though my life's collapse was a yard sale waiting to happen. The deeper I sank into the role of the struggling, broken relative, the more their masks slipped. Their words became sharper, their laughter bolder. Some even stopped inviting me to gatherings, as though poverty were contagious. It was astonishing. These were the people who claimed family is everything, the ones who loved quoting phrases about loyalty, yet their actions revealed nothing but hollow words. I didn't push too hard. I didn't demand large amounts or beg endlessly. I kept it subtle enough that helping me would have been simple, effortless, barely a dent in their pockets. But no one wanted to extend even a fraction of kindness. Except one. Every night, I lay awake replaying their reactions in my mind. I thought of the cousins who laughed, the uncles who whispered, the aunt who turned her back, and the one kind voice that offered help. And with every memory, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just a test anymore, it was a reckoning. I had walked into this experiment wondering if I was being paranoid, wondering if perhaps my doubts about my family were unfair. Now I had all the proof I needed. Their greed, their indifference, their delight in my pain, it was all exposed. And they had no idea what was coming. The millions sat quietly in my account, waiting like a storm on the horizon. My family thought I was on the verge of collapse, thought I was desperate, weak, and vulnerable. They had shown their true selves without hesitation. And soon, I would show mine. I promised myself that when the time came, every single one of them would remember how they treated me. They would remember the laughs, the gossip, the dismissive shrugs. They would remember turning away from me when all I asked for was kindness. And when they realized what I had been hiding all along, their shame would cut deeper than anything they had ever said to me. Revenge was already writing itself in silence. I closed my eyes one night and smiled, the kind of smile that only comes from knowing the game is yours to control. They had failed the ultimate test, and my revenge was already writing itself in silence. The deeper I sank into my role, the more my family revealed who they truly were. It was as though pretending to be broke had given them permission to drop their masks and speak freely, without fear of judgment. I became the example they whispered about, the cautionary tale they loved repeating. I didn't confront them. I didn't argue. I just listened, stored it all away, and let their words become the fuel for what I was planning. I started small, approaching my siblings again. My brother, who once borrowed money from me when he was in college, laughed when I asked if I could crash at his place for a few weeks. He told me bluntly that he didn't want my bad luck to rub off on his family. He had a new car parked outside, his children playing with expensive gadgets in the living room, but apparently, a spare couch was too much to offer. His wife stood behind him, smirking, nodding in agreement as though I were some unwelcome stranger at the door. I walked away quietly, but inside I was burning. I turned to my sister, the one who always posted online about the importance of sisterhood and family bonds. I asked if she could help me cover a single utility bill until I got back on my feet. She frowned, sighed dramatically, and told me she was barely surviving herself, even though I knew her husband's business was thriving. Then she added, "Maybe this will teach you to be more responsible." The word stung, not because I needed her money, but because I realized she had been waiting for an opportunity to put me down. My uncles were worse. When I approached one, he chuckled and said, "We all make mistakes, but some people never learn. Maybe this will humble you." He didn't even bother pretending to consider helping. Another uncle told me he had too many financial obligations already, then spent the next 10 minutes bragging about his new vacation home. My aunts whispered about me at gatherings, their voices dripping with judgment. "She always thought she was better than us, and now look at her," one of them said, loud enough for me to hear. Their satisfaction at my supposed downfall was impossible to miss. The cousins, though, took things to a new level. One afternoon, I sat across from a cousin I once considered a close friend. I told him I might have to sell my jewelry to keep up with expenses. His eyes lit up instantly. He offered to buy it, but at a fraction of its worth, smirking like he was doing me a favor. I could see it clearly in his eyes. He wasn't concerned about me, he was calculating how to benefit from my collapse. Another cousin laughed openly when I mentioned being behind on rent. "Guess the tables have turned," she sneered. "You always acted like you had it together." Her words dripped with spite, as if she had been waiting years for this moment. The gossip spread quickly. I could feel it every time I walked into a room at family gatherings. Conversations would stop abruptly, then resume in hushed tones once I passed. They treated me like I was diseased, someone they were above, someone whose downfall gave them a sense of superiority. No one asked how I was holding up emotionally. No one offered me a meal, a bed, or even genuine words of encouragement. All they gave me were sharp smiles, mocking comments, and judgment disguised as advice. But in the middle of the storm, there was one voice that broke through. My distant cousin, the one who had quietly sent me money for my electricity bill, reached out again. She didn't have much, yet she asked if I was eating properly, if I needed anything. Her concern was real, unpolished, and genuine. She even invited me over for dinner, telling me I could stay the night if I ever felt overwhelmed. She never once asked how I got into trouble, never judged, never hesitated. Her kindness felt like a lighthouse in the darkness, a reminder that not everyone had failed me. Still, the betrayals piled up. I watched how quickly the people I thought I knew revealed their greed. Some even speculated out loud about what would happen if I lost everything completely. One cousin joked that maybe I'd be forced to sell family heirlooms and they'd get them at a good price. Another wondered if I'd have to beg on the streets. They laughed while picturing me broken and desperate, their cruelty thinly veiled as humor. The betrayal wasn't just in their refusal to help. It was in the way they delighted in my supposed misery. It was in the way they spoke of me as though I wasn't family, as though I were an outsider whose pain entertained them. And the most painful part was that they didn't think twice about it. They thought they were safe, that I would never forget my place at the bottom. But I wasn't at the bottom. I was sitting on millions. I was watching them perform in a test they didn't even know they were taking. Every laugh, every insult, every dismissive shrug was being carved into memory. And the more they revealed themselves, the more precise my revenge became. One evening, I overheard two relatives speaking as I passed by. They didn't notice me. "You know, if she loses her apartment, maybe we can convince her to sell us her furniture cheap. She's desperate enough." The other chuckled. "Or maybe she'll finally learn that no one bails you out in this world. She always thought she was too good for us." I stopped in my tracks, letting the words sink in. Too good for them? I had never claimed to be better. I had simply lived my life. But hearing their bitterness made me realize something. This wasn't just about money. It was about envy. My wins, no matter how small, had always threatened them. And now that they thought I had lost, they were feasting on the illusion. Day after day, the weight of their betrayal grew heavier, but so did my determination. I didn't let my anger spill over. I didn't snap or reveal the truth. Instead, I played my role even better. I let them believe I was hanging by a thread. I let them see what they wanted to see, a woman beaten down by life, ready to beg. And while they smirked and whispered, I was quietly planning the moment when every one of them would choke on their own greed. The kind cousin's kindness gave me strength. She proved to me that the test wasn't just exposing cruelty, it was also revealing rare loyalty. She was proof that compassion still existed, that family didn't always mean betrayal. And I knew, without doubt, that when the time came, she would be the only one to benefit from what I had. Everyone else had already failed. They didn't know it, but their fate was sealed. I had all the evidence I needed. Their words, their smirks, their refusal to lift a finger when they thought I was broken, they had written their own punishment. All I had to do was deliver it. I watched them, memorized them, let their own greed paint them in colors they couldn't wash off. The test was over, and the results were clear. My family was rotten to its core, poisoned by envy and selfishness. They didn't deserve me, they didn't deserve my trust, and they certainly didn't deserve a single cent of my fortune. I had stayed silent long enough. Soon, the silence would break. And when it did, their laughter would turn into shame, their whispers into stunned silence. They thought I was weak, desperate, and humiliated. But I wasn't the one being tested. They were. And they had failed miserably. The day I had been waiting for finally arrived. I had endured their whispers, their mockery, their greedy calculations. I had played the role of the struggling woman perfectly, letting them believe I was broken, worthless, desperate. Now it was time to turn the script upside down. I sent invitations to every relative who had turned me away, every cousin who had laughed, every aunt and uncle who had whispered behind my back. The message was simple: I wanted to celebrate a fresh start. The curiosity alone was enough to guarantee their presence. Greed always pulled them closer. Some thought I must have found a new job, others speculated I might have married rich, and some whispered that maybe I had come crawling back and wanted to beg for their forgiveness. None of them expected what I had prepared. I rented the most elegant hall in the city, decorated with dazzling lights and tables overflowing with food and wine. The kind cousin who had helped me was by my side, wide-eyed and shocked at the luxury. She had no idea how much I had truly won, but she knew this wasn't the act of a poor woman clawing her way back. I saw gratitude in her eyes, but also confusion. When the relatives began to arrive, their reactions were exactly what I expected. They gawked at the chandeliers, the sparkling tables, the live music. Their expressions shifted quickly, from shock to envy, then to thinly veiled smiles. They congratulated me, pretending they had always believed in me, pretending they had always wanted the best for me. The hypocrisy was almost amusing. I let them settle, let them eat, let them drink. I watched them whisper to each other, already calculating how they could benefit. I knew exactly what was running through their minds: she must be back on her feet. Maybe she'll give us something. Maybe we'll get a share. Their greed filled the room more than the music did. Finally, I stood at the center of the hall and called for silence. The chatter stopped, and dozens of eyes turned toward me. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the thrill of knowing this moment would carve itself into their memories forever. I began softly, thanking them for coming, thanking them for being family. My words dripped with irony, but they were too blinded by greed to notice. Then I paused, smiled, and dropped the truth. I never went bankrupt. I never lost everything. In fact, I'd been a millionaire all along. The silence that followed was delicious. Their smiles froze, their eyes widened, their drinks paused midway to their lips. Whispers rippled through the crowd. I could see the panic on their faces, the way they replayed every word they had spoken to me, every insult, every refusal. They looked exposed, naked under the weight of the truth. I continued, my voice steady. 4 months, I asked for help. Small favors, simple kindness. Most of you turned away. Some of you mocked me. Some of you plotted how to benefit from my downfall. And tonight, I want to give each of you something to remember me by. I signaled the staff, and they began handing out envelopes. Each relative received one. They clutched them eagerly, eyes gleaming, already imagining large checks, already calculating how to spend what they hadn't earned. Go ahead, I said. Open them. The sound of tearing envelopes filled the hall. Then, the gasps. Inside each envelope was a check, but not a real one. Each check was blank or written for a meaningless amount, $1, $5, even $0. The symbolism hit instantly. Their faces twisted in confusion, then anger, then humiliation. Some shouted, demanding explanations. Others stood in stunned silence, cheeks burning with shame. I didn't flinch. I looked each of them in the eye. That's what your loyalty was worth. That's what your kindness amounted to. Nothing. Their outrage filled the air, but I raised my voice above it. You showed me your true selves when you thought I had nothing. You revealed that family means nothing to you unless there's money involved. You failed the ultimate test. And now you will never see a cent of my fortune. Gasps, protests, denials, they erupted all at once. Some tried to defend themselves, insisting they didn't know how bad it was. Others begged, saying they would have helped if they'd realized how desperate I was. Lies, excuses, pathetic attempts to rewrite history. I let them speak, knowing every word only exposed them further. Then I turned to the one person who had stood by me, the cousin who had given me help without hesitation. I handed her an envelope, different from the rest. She opened it slowly, her eyes widening as she saw the truth, a real check, large enough to change her life forever. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at me, her hands trembling. You were the only one who showed kindness when you thought I had nothing, I said. You passed the test. This is yours. The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward her, filled with jealousy, disbelief, and regret. They knew instantly that they had lost, not because they didn't have the opportunity, but because they had chosen cruelty. Their greed had cost them everything. I let the silence linger, let the weight of it crush them. Then I delivered the final blow. You laughed at me, you gossiped, you turned your backs. Tonight, you see the cost of your betrayal. I owe you nothing. And you will get nothing. Their faces burned with humiliation. Some stormed out, some sat frozen, others tried to beg. But it was too late. The test was over. The results were final. I stood tall, calm, satisfied. I had given them their chance. They had written their own punishment. All I did was deliver it. The silence that followed my words was heavier than anything I had ever felt. My relatives stood scattered around the hall, clutching their worthless checks like broken promises. Their eyes burned with shame, envy, and desperation. Some avoided my gaze, staring at the floor as if it might swallow them. Others glared at me, their anger rising now that their greed had been exposed. But I didn't waver. For the first time in my life, I was completely in control. One aunt stormed up to me, her voice shaking with fury. How dare you embarrass us like this? We're family. I looked at her calmly, the same way she had once looked at me when I asked for help and she chose her kitchen renovation over my hunger. I said nothing. My silence was louder than any insult. A cousin tore up the fake check and threw the pieces to the floor. This is cruel, he shouted. But I remembered how he had offered to buy my belongings for pennies, laughing at the idea of me being desperate. I met his anger with a small smile. Cruel? I said softly. No. Just fair. Some tried to backpedal. An uncle stammered about how he would have helped if he had known how serious it was. Another cousin insisted she was just busy at the time and meant no harm. Their excuses washed over me like meaningless noise. They weren't apologizing because they cared, they were apologizing because they realized they had lost. And then, in the middle of the chaos, I looked at the one relative who mattered. She sat quietly, still staring at the real check I had given her. Tears rolled down her cheeks, her hands trembling. She whispered, I don't deserve this. I walked over, placed my hand on hers, and said, you deserve more than all of them combined. You were the only one who showed me kindness without expecting anything in return. This is yours, because you reminded me that family doesn't have to mean betrayal. The room fell even quieter. Everyone's eyes were on her, filled with a mix of bitterness and regret. They understood now, this wasn't just about money. It was about loyalty. and they had failed. I turned back to the crowd one last time. This was never about wealth. It was about truth. And now you all know the truth about yourselves. My words echoed in the hall, leaving a sting they would never forget. One by one, they began to leave. Some stomped out angrily, others slipped away in shame. No one congratulated me, no one wished me well. They couldn't. They had been unmasked, and the weight of their own greed was unbearable. When the last of them was gone, the hall was quiet again, filled only with the soft music and the faint clinking of glasses. I stood with the cousin who had passed the test, both of us knowing this night had changed everything. She thanked me, her voice trembling, but I shook my head. Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You did what no one else did, you cared when it mattered. That night, as I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden of wondering who truly loved me was gone. I had my answer, and it was clearer than ever. I had lost nothing. They had lost me. In the days that followed, the calls began. Some begged for forgiveness, others tried to convince me they had been misunderstood. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I had seen their true faces, and there was no going back. I focused instead on the future. On living freely, on building a life where I was surrounded only by genuine kindness, not hollow words. I knew I would never forget what I had learned. Family is not defined by blood, but by loyalty. And sometimes, the cruelest betrayal comes from the people closest to you. My revenge wasn't in the fake checks or the grand reveal. My revenge was in the silence that followed, in the way they would forever live with the knowledge that their greed had cost them everything. They would remember the night they laughed at me, gossiped about me, turned their backs, and they would remember the night I exposed them all. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their love. I had the truth. And that truth was worth more than any fortune. If this story struck you, imagine how many masks hide behind smiles in real life. Loyalty is rare, greed is common, and betrayal always leaves scars. Subscribe now for more powerful revenge stories that expose the truth, and never miss the justice that unfolds next.